Anybody else while we're there? Okay. A little bilingual going on there. Yeah, okay. That's right. And sometimes that's true. We have more than one language that kind of stands out to us. So we'll kind of catch up here on the screen since James has got it ready for us. All right. By way of quick reminder, that's kind of where we spent a lot of time toward the end of our time together last night, was making sure that we understood the two most important letters in the word communication is IC. Now, not all of you saw the same thing. Not all of you had the same conclusion. Amanda said the two most important letters was M and M. So she made her, you know where her mind was during the session last night. But until we get to the point where we can say to each other, I see what you're talking about. And let me re-emphasize, I mentioned this twice last night, let me re-emphasize that doesn't mean we always have to agree. You know, I can appreciate somebody else's opinion about something without necessarily agreeing with them. It allows me to understand them. It allows me to know how to respond to them in certain situations. It teaches me to avoid certain things with people in certain situations. It doesn't make it right or wrong necessarily. It just allows me to understand. There might be some subject matter that wouldn't be something that we needed to discuss, or we need to discuss it in a particular context. But the only way I'm going to know that is for that to be communicated, for that not only be articulated but explained to me, and for me to listen and to process it, and even build in some safeguards if I have to, that I would be able to say, okay, I heard what you said, but I'm not really completely sure what you meant. So let me give that a little thought. Let me process that. Let me think about it. That honors a person who obviously has thought their verbalization through, and they really want to say something. If you can respond, if you know the answer, or if there's something you can describe without being defensive, then you can go ahead and do it. But if it catches you off guard and the first thing you want to do is retaliate, not a good thing to respond at that occasion. Because you didn't really listen to them, you didn't really process it, and they've spent some time with it, and you haven't. And so just ask for that time. Say, let me think about that. Can we talk again? That allows them to know you really did hear them, and that you're going to process that, and that you're going to continue this exchange of information and dialogue. Now that's real communication. We don't always take the time to do that because we always kind of say always. Sometimes we get kind of defensive. So there are different types of communication. We didn't spend a lot of time talking about this last night, but since you've had time to kind of look through the love languages and look at what might be prominent in the way that you respond to people or expect people to respond to you, first you have the intrapersonal communication. You talk to yourself? Well, I talk to myself. Like, okay, you should have gotten up earlier and got that done. Now you're going to be behind all day. You know how that works. You have that conversation with yourself. That's not odd. Sometimes say, well, that person talks to himself. And they say that to me sometimes like something's wrong with the person who talks to himself. I'm thinking, hey, what you don't know is I talk to myself all the time. If that's odd, you're talking to an odd person. But you look at Luke chapter 15, you remember the prodigal son? You remember there's some dynamics going on there, some things being communicated without a whole lot being said. He just asked for his inheritance. We don't know the background. We don't know all the whys he wanted his inheritance. We kind of assume some things, and he goes off and he wastes everything. But when he's in that pig pen, it says that he came to himself. And he had a conversation with himself. Didn't he? He said, how many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare, and I faint? I'm in this destitute condition when I know what my father's house is like. He's talking to himself. There's no one else there he's exchanging information with. He has the information. He has the contrast between the bounties of his Father's house and the destitute condition he's placed himself in. And he's talking about it. He's having that conversation. He said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to my Father, and I'm going to say to my Father. He's not talking to his Father right now. He's practicing talking to his Father, isn't he? That's intrapersonal communication. Have you ever said or had said to you, think before you speak? What's that thinking about? Kind of rehearsing, okay, if I say this, they might take it that way, and we have a little history here, so probably what I need to do is explain this first and say, okay, I'm not insinuating anything. And we start practicing that conversation. That's what we mean by think before you speak. Process that and see what that's going to sound like to that person in this context, on this occasion, for this reason. If we would just take that time and process that intrapersonally, oftentimes we could sometimes talk ourselves out of saying that. We were going to have dessert last night with Eve's. So we had a large supper, and so I didn't want to hold dessert myself, so we tried to prepare ahead of time. This interpersonal conversation. So Denise and I having a conversation. I said, why don't we get something that we both like and we'll share? She's very polite, and so what do you want? And I said, what I said was, I didn't have that intro first in conversation, and so I said, you just decide because you're harder to please than I am. And I said, caught myself before she had any feedback, exchange of information. I said, that came out different than it should have. I said, I like more things than you do. There's a difference. There's not many things I don't like. She has some preferences about things. It's not that she's hard to please. She just has preferences of dessert. And so I can eat any of them. And so I can eat her preference and not bother me. My preference, if I have a favorite one, she may not like at all. But you see the difference in the description? Immediately it came out negative, didn't it? Like, you're just really hard to please. That wasn't the way I meant it. And I said, can you believe we just left the session on communication? And that came out of my mouth that way? It just does sometimes when we don't think. But the positive thing is you catch that. Now in that passage of Luke chapter 15, there's interpersonal conversation. Once this practice has taken place, this intrapersonal conversation had taken place with the prodigal son, then he goes to his father. And what he practiced, he said. He had practiced that he would say to his father, I have sinned. I'm no longer worthy to be your son. Make me as one of your hired servants. So what did he say? Well, he said what he practiced. That's right. He got it all out. His father ran to meet him. That kind of creates a different communication, doesn't it? Evidently, he's thinking, since I've sinned against my father, I've been gone so long, I wasted everything he's ever saved for me, that he thought I'd use it for life. And he reasoned all these things out. He probably had in his mind that his father's going to be disappointed because he was disappointed in himself. So already something's been communicated without a word being said. When his father sees him afar off, he runs and meets him. You and I can create an environment of communication if we respond to people, that they may have transgressed against us, that we've had issues together in the past, and maybe they separate themselves from us in a family situation or in a church situation, and they come back. Our attitude can communicate volumes if we go meet them, rather than them have to seek us out and slink back in some way, just say, truly missed you. This father let the son know he'd missed him, but he went ahead and said what he practiced. I'm no longer to be called your son. I've sinned. So that's an example of not only intrapersonal communication, practicing what you feel, what you want others to know, but also expressing that to those people. We might say, when we look at the context, that the father didn't listen to him. Well, he did listen to him. But the son's already described a father who treated everybody the same way anyway. He treated his hired servants with kindness and generosity. So this is not unusual. His father was who he remembered him as being. And then we communicate oftentimes in a group environment. We've got a group environment here. Some of you would hesitate saying anything with this many people present. If it's just you and your spouse or your close friends, you might have conversation, but group things make you nervous. There was a group situation here. The father communicated something to all the servants. He told them to make a feast ready. You go kill the fatted calf, and this is going to be a collection of folks, and they're all going to celebrate the fact that this son has come home. What is that communicating? Here's you've got this group, and not only group, but you've got a publicizing of that. Now, in the background, there are all kinds of little dynamics going on, aren't they? There's the elder brother. What did he do? A little distance in the background. He sees it. What's his perspective? All right. He has already had conversation with himself, evidently, because now his feelings are hurt. The brother's back, and we're throwing a party. I've not gone anywhere. I've gone to the fields. I've worked the flocks. I've done everything that a faithful, devoted son would do. And you have never, ever thrown a party for me. And he's at a distance, see? What was going on there was communicating something to him entirely different. What had to happen? The father had to pull himself away from the group, from the celebration. He had to go and have interpersonal communication with the son. Away from the group. The two of them had to talk about it. That conversation was more private. I just thought that would be a good example for us, just to familiar story to us that has all those dynamics. And so it's not odd to have a conversation with yourself, unless you never use those conversations with anybody else, because then that can become problematic, because you can tell yourself lies. You know that? You can tell yourself you look a certain way, or you can't do certain things, and you can tell yourself that long enough till you're just totally inept in those areas. You look in the mirror, you'll see who you've described by telling yourself that lie. So we have to be careful about what we communicate. We need to process that, and then just don't keep it to ourselves. Make sure once we process it properly, we can articulate it. That's what we mentioned last night. So anybody else, while we're up and going, want to share with us? Those are the major areas. Like anything, this is not the end all. This is not all there is. But this is a generality of how to describe things. We talked about words of affirmation. Some people like to be encouraged, acknowledged, quality time. Sometimes it's not a matter about a lot of verbal conversation. You just like your family around you. You like your friends with you. You like that time together. Some folks like to receive gifts. In most cases, they don't have to be expensive gifts. They can be just acknowledged. Might pick up a flower on the way home. How many of you, as mothers in particular, when your child first starts understanding that you are his mother, and that they really do love you, they pick a flower, it might be a weed even, if it's a flower to them, and they bring it to you. And it might be old bitterweed out of the lot, and yet you're going to put it in a vase of water, and you're going to keep it. because they were communicating to you, and I love you, and I saw this, and it's beautiful to me, and I wanted you to have it. That's what you communicate with them. Some people like receiving acknowledgement. Might be a card, just to say, saw this card, and boy, it described you and how I feel about you. It might be a meal that you would prepare for. It might be a lot of things, but some people communicate that way, or that's their language. Acts of service. I told you an example last night of, I grew up in an environment where you do chores. If you do chores, everybody's happy, and so I don't like things not being done, and so that's how I try to communicate love. And then physical touch. Some people grow up in an environment where their family doesn't hug each other, they don't embrace very much, and so it's kind of awkward to them. And the other person may have grown up in an environment where parents are always hugging on them, and when they don't get that at all, they think, wow, my spouse doesn't love me like my mother and daddy did. And they may try to reach out for that, and that may be what they need. All right, while we're there, anybody have any enlightening things that you learned about your language last night? Now, this is not communication. Right? All right. Yes, sir. All right. That's right. Should be a celebration. That's right. You should communicate to them how you feel, and just rejoicing. If you didn't hear Brother Mike, he said, there are other stories related in Luke 15, and they have one thing in common: they all end with rejoicing. Something was lost, and it's found. And that's really the point of communication, isn't it? When people feel deprived in their relationships, it's usually because something's lost. Something they're expecting, something they need, that they don't receive. And so if we're going to have rejoicing in our relationships, if we're going to have rejoicing in the church, we kind of have to understand how to communicate, when to communicate, and what to communicate. So you say and listen for affirming words. Practice saying those things. As soon as that came out of my mouth last night, I knew that wasn't very affirming, was it? You're hard to please. There's no way to make those affirming words. It doesn't sound like you're complimenting anybody, does it? That's not who she is. That's just, okay, we've got to turn right up here, and I think this is the right place, and I don't want to hold dessert myself, and it just didn't filter it, didn't come out right. But immediately, I knew it didn't come out right. And so you want to listen and say those right kind of words. Take and make good use of time together. If it is quality time, then you want to take that time together. How many of us have said, easy for us to say, how many of us have said, I just don't have time? I know. I just don't have time. And so how do we make the time? If that's someone's language and we don't ever have time, what's that person think we're saying? Of everything I'm responsible for, of every relationship I have, you're not the most important. Don't have time for you. That's what they hear. That's not what we intend to say, but that's what they hear. You want to give and receive expressions of thoughtfulness. Again, don't think I'm saying you've got to buy an expensive gift for each other. Perform and appreciate acts of service. So if that's your language, you need to practice it often enough, people know how to use it. The sister back here said this morning, she has more than one language that she uses. And so there is sometimes a need, experience, even an ability to be bilingual. And in a family, not just with husband and wife, but with children, and all of them have a different love language, guess what? You better learn to be bilingual. You better learn to speak their language and communicate at some level so that you can function. All right, questions or comments about those things? Yeah. There you go. There you go. Extend and accept physical touch. Not easy for some people. My family are kind of huggers, you know what I mean? When you got 11 kids, you don't have separate chairs. Denise, when she and I started dating, she'd come over, have dinner with us or something, and there'd be 2 or 3 kids in the same chair. And she just already start fanning like, whew, that's just too many people, all wound up together there, but where are you going to sit that many kids? You're going to have to be together a lot. And so we're always hugging on each other. You go into some families and you hug like, whoa, wait a minute. Give me some space here. I don't know you. And Southern folk talk about hugging necks. You say that out west and they think, why would you do that? What's this neck thing all about? And we're just talking about embracing, aren't we, when we say hugging neck. But some people, that's how they communicate. And if that's not something you're comfortable with and that person never receives it, what do you think they're going to assume? Well, they don't really care about me. My mother and father care about me because they're always hugging me. But every time I try to hug my wife, she just kind of pushes me away. That communicates something. All right, you had? Okay. All right, let's go back a slide and see if I can. I can't go back a slide without going this way. Just curious, before I move into time management, how many of you words of affirmation? All right, Denise. This is not one of those things where you look and see what everybody else does. This is your language. All right, so good number. What about quality time? All right. Receiving gifts. All right. 2 hands go up on that one. All right. Send me gifts. Acts of service. All right. That's me. That's a good trait in Christ to have, at least one of your languages. Physical touch. All right. James, you raised your hand on every one of them. No, you didn't. Okay. You'd find this kind of humorous. Denise would remember this. We had a marriage retreat when I was preaching in Tennessee, and so the couple signed up, and we had a Friday and Saturday, and we had rented space at a hotel and had a guest speaker come in, and we did this exercise of the love languages, and even made sure everybody had a book, and so we came back the next morning, for breakfast, and we were reviewing some of these things, and one of the deacons, we were asking what they learned. He said, I can't believe it. He said, I have bought my wife diamonds, a new car, and he named all this stuff, and he said, her love language is words of affirmation. If I had known that, I could have saved all this money. What in the world was I spending all that money for? He said, I knew she always took it and thanked me, but she wasn't excited about it as I thought she ought to be. Come to find out, it's not her language. So you might want to know what their language is. Yes? Hmm? Okay. Oh, all right. If you didn't hear Alma, she said the order of things, if we don't have that word, we need that words of affirmation first. And we really do. When we're growing up, we want folks to brag on us, don't we? We want our parents to tell us we did good. We want our parents to tell us that we're pretty and we're strong and we're fast and all those things, so that's a good place to start, isn't it? If you leave that out, it's kind of hard to communicate the others sometimes. So keep that in mind, and that's a good point, that all these are important. But most of us have a predominant. What's your other one? What's your 2? Okay? And if you don't have one of those, you're likely not going to have the other. If there's not time for each other, then obviously you're going to feel depleted in both. And if you make the time, then you can address both of those. Great. Appreciate you participating in that. James, you were just voting. You didn't have a question, did you? Whoop. Did you do that or did I do that? Okay. I think this is a powerful stick here. I just pointed in that direction. All right. We'll spend the next few minutes mention to you that we'd originally planned to break out through part of this morning, but we'll wait and do that during the realistic romance section. We'll just do the time management together. We mentioned to you that when couples come and see us, there are predominant things that they present. And one is communication, and the other is time management. They are in all different directions, particularly couples who have children. You know, there's responsibilities with children, there's school, there's sports activities, there's doctor's appointments, and so their time, it gets stretched. Husband and wife may still be employed somewhere, and they're just trying to mesh their schedules, and it gets away from them, and it becomes really, really problematic. Or they just don't manage what they do have. It's not that they don't have time, just don't manage the time well. Have you ever thought you had your day all planned out, and on paper it looked like it's going to work well? You got your cup of coffee and you sit down in the swing and phone starts ringing, and either you just lose your motivation after the conversation and you don't do what was on the schedule first, and the day's over and you didn't get anything on the list done. Guess what? Whatever you're going to do tomorrow, what you didn't do today gets added to that list. It gets complicated sometimes. So I've had those experiences. When we talk about redeeming the time, you know, it means to buy up, to cash in, to recognize the value of time and to invest it wisely. It won't come back. I'll probably say this again, but I don't want to forget it, and it's not in my notes, and so since it's crossed my mind, I better say it. There are people in our lives that remind us of, say our lives, mine and Denise's lives, you know, that remind us that we have aged somewhat. And the doctor, don't know why, but they seem to have something recorded because they just keep saying the same thing. They'll say, well, at your age, you know. Well, I know how old I am. I knew how old I was when I went in there. Why is that a part of the discussion? You know, just do your examination and tell me what I need to do. They say, well, at your age, in other words, don't worry about that a whole lot. You don't have a whole lot of time to worry about it anyway. Now, that's not what they said. But why is that part of the conversation? Well, there is a journey we're on in life, and you get to a certain point and your body's wearing down, and there's certain things you can't do. So Denise has picked up that. I don't know if the doctor influenced her or what. But I'll say things like I've always said in our marriage, you know, one of these days I would like to do. We've said that ever since we married. We had these dreams and these anticipation, and she'll say, we better get it done. Well, what does that mean? Well, we don't have as long as we used to. Well, how do you know? We see the realistic part sets in when you've lived a few years to realize how fleeting time is. It's really valuable. And so if it's something really important to us, we might as well go ahead and schedule it and go ahead and enjoy it instead of putting it off and just never accomplish it. We kind of fit that in there in our conversation sometimes, say, what's on your bucket list? Well, she kind of reminds me, you better start getting done what's in the bucket. You know, because you're going to run out of time and your bucket's still going to be full of those things that you didn't get done. Now, she doesn't say it in those words, but she reminds me that time is getting away. It's fleeting by. You don't get it back, and so you might need to use it wisely. When we say time, we're talking about a period in which something exists or happens. Have you looked back over your life and there are some things that you wanted to do and you didn't do and now you couldn't do? You don't qualify anymore because you're too old in people's definition of things. And so you just accept that. It doesn't mean you ought to go around grieved about it all the time. It just ought to be a reminder to us that we're talking about something that's valuable. And so when Ephesians chapter 5 reminds us, redeem the time, for the days are evil, there are a lot of things going on around us that's going to misuse the time. So you buy it up. You make sure that the evil doesn't control it, that the world doesn't vacuum it away from you. You make sure that you buy it up, that you control it, that you utilize it presently. Because if you use it for good, guess what happens? That period of time in your life cannot be used for evil. That's the point it's making. You purchase it. You buy it up. You possess it. And you use it. Those are important things for us to remember about time. Now let's apply that in our relationship. When we recognize its limitation, life is brief at best, isn't it? What did James say in James chapter 4? It's like a vapor. It appears for a little while and vanishes away. Before I get my day started every morning, my favorite thing to do is I have my devotional, so I'll go out on our front porch and sit in the swing. And my neighbor across the road, I didn't have to dig a pond because he has a really nice pond, so I get all the effect of a pond without having to keep up the pond, and so he's got a beautiful pond. I look across the road at my neighbor's pond, and a lot of mornings there's fog out on the pond. Sometimes it's so thick you can't see the pond. I'll sit out there a while. What happens to the fog? Vanisheth away. Sun comes out, it just melts away, it's gone. So I kind of have a reminder pretty often. Life's a vapor, it appears for a little while and vanisheth away. And again, I don't let it depress me. I just think, I need to get a hold of this. While I have the opportunity, I need to make sure I use it wisely. It's brief at best. The length of each day is the same for everyone. Now, when you say, I don't have time, and someone else says, yes, I can do that. Sure, I can do that. What's the difference? All right, it is a priority. Again, we're not always talking about right and wrong. We're just talking about priorities. There are occasions where our work schedule would not allow us to do certain things at certain times. Somebody else's work schedule is different. If we required that being done at a different time, they couldn't do it, but they can do it now. So we're not putting anybody down by saying, anytime something needs to be done, you set the priority. But we are saying, you're doing something with that time at that time. So you can't really say, I don't have time. What are you going to do with that time? It's your priority. So maybe if we train ourselves to say, well, at that time, here's what I'm going to be doing, it doesn't leave the impression that you don't have time. It communicates that I've chosen to do something else with that time. It can be an important thing, but say, I already have commitment. When I was finishing my PhD, I'm a minister, I've got a counseling practice, I'm teaching at the Memphis School of Preaching, I'm teaching some classes, and I'm doing what I want to do, serving people. And my wife realized the clock ticking, we'd invested money in this degree, and she said, you got to get this done. And I said, well, but they need me. Somebody's in the hospital or somebody needs to talk, and so she suggested that I have one day a week where I didn't counsel, I didn't make hospital visits, I didn't do anything else, just work on my schoolwork. So we looked at the calendar, had to make some priorities, change some things around. Turned out at that time Thursdays, I could have a day. Really hard for me to say no. And I said, what if an emergency comes up? She said, they'll call 911 like everybody else. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, but they need me. No. If it's a real emergency, we all have the same number, don't we? 911. And people will respond. So it's not like they're going to be without care. And so it took me a while to do that, but when I got that day set up, here's what I had to do. I never told people I didn't have time. I said, I already have something scheduled in. That's true. I had my study time scheduled. That was a priority for Thursdays because I had responsibilities. I'd invested in this degree. You don't get the degree, you wasted your money. You're not a good steward. So when are you going to do it? Thursday's when I was going to do it. And you know, after I changed the terminology and after I explained to folks that I had set a priority and said, I already have something scheduled. And Denise and I called it my undisclosed location day. Sometimes I'd be at the library, sometimes I'd be in the room she set aside for me at the house, sometimes I'd be at the church office and secretary with my door closed and secretary say, he's got something scheduled right now. But after a while, everybody started reacting to my priority. They understood that. If the elders were planning something, they would say, well, we can't do it on Thursdays because that's Jerry's undisclosed location day. But I had to communicate that. I had to set that priority. It wasn't that I didn't have time to do other things. I had set a priority to do that for a reason that was important to me and to my wife and to our family. And we felt like, to the brotherhood as a whole, get that training to help folks, going to help more people in the long run. Those are the kind of things, if we talk out loud and communicate properly, then folks know what our priorities are. And that's a good use of time, isn't it? Before, you know, when I was with my family, I was thinking, I got a paper due. You know, I don't want to throw something together and get a bad grade. You know, I want to do my best work. And I'm sitting there and my wife's talking. I'm not really hearing what she's saying. And so I'm not really with her. I'm not working on the paper. So really not being a good use of time at all, is it? So look at your life. And we're here to particularly look at our relationships and our families and how we can function at the best level and enhance our relationship with each other. Time is a big component there, isn't it? Those languages that we want to learn how to speak, when are you going to learn that language? When are you going to set that priority? So the length of time is the same for all of us. You can't say I don't have time. It's like, here's what I'm going to do with my time, and we have to make the priority. Live as if this is your last day. I try to make sure, and I share these things with you not to say you have to do what I do, but just to let you know, I try to practice what I preach. I try to communicate every single day to my wife that I love her. We have kind of a little running contest. We try to be the first one to tell the other one that we love them the most. And I'll text her. I kind of have an advantage because I'm an early riser. And sometimes she'll get up just to try to beat me at sending that and then go back to bed. She's not an early riser. She could stay up all night, but she just doesn't like to get up early. And so I'll text her and say, I love you the most today. Maybe my last day. I'm not a morbid person. I don't say, boy, this may be the last day. But I want, if this is my last day, if it was her last memory of me, I'd like for her to go back and look at that text and say, he beat me today. Not really that. I'd like for her to go back and say, you know, he always expressed to me that he loved me. I don't want her last memories to be something I've neglected, something I haven't done. And I try to be that way with everybody. If I'm going to have a conversation with you, I want it to be a pleasant conversation. Even if you and I don't agree on something, I want your last memory of me to say, you know, he listened to what I had to say. We talked about that in detail. He never saw it my way, but he listened so he could know what my way was. I'd like for that to be your impression of me, if that were our last conversation. So you have to have those conversations that way all the time, or your last conversation might not be pleasant. Denise and I lived out west for a number of years, and one of the women who was a member of the church there, and she was married again. This was her second husband. Her first husband was killed in a plane crash. And that'd been a lot of years ago. She's remarried. She's got, children by both husbands. But that still grieved her that when her husband left that morning for his flight, they had an argument. She'd driven him to work. She let him out, and they'd had a disagreement. And the last words they said to each other were harsh words. She'd like that time back. She would like to play that back and say, okay, let's talk about that when you get home. Don't worry about that right now. You just concentrate on your flight. Malfunction in the plane motor, plane crashes. Never had a conversation with him again. And again, I'm not saying that so we're morbid about things, but so we buy up that time. That we redeem it, we control it and say, nah, if this was the last thing I said to that person, the last thing they remember about me, I wouldn't want it to be this. Can we talk about that later? That gets our blood pressure down. That allows us to have that intro personal conversation with ourselves to say, how would this sound? I don't know how you feel about it, but I like to read the Bible stories and then put it in my lifetime context and say, if that were me, I kind of envision the prodigal son on his way home. He didn't get in his car and just whisk home or catch a plane. He wasn't there in a hurry. He had to walk home. He had gone to a far country, wherever that was a distance, wasn't it? And so he had to walk home. I've always pictured him practicing that over and over and over. How about you? Father, I've sinned against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Please make me as one of your hired servants. Father, I have sinned against you. I am no longer worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of your hired servants. So you see, if you and I would practice, buy up that time and say, this is how I want to use it. And this may be my last opportunity to use it, so I want to always use it wisely. Would that change how we talk to each other? You think we might catch those words before they come out of our mouth? Respect its value to our personal responsibilities. Somebody, I think it's Brother Ron, mentioned the priorities. Whatever our responsibilities are, we want to prioritize that. It's okay to have recreational time. It's okay to have leisure time. All those things are certainly things we ought to plan along the way, but they can't have the priority. Responsibilities have to be done first. Take care of the things that are our responsibility first. If we possess that time, let's make sure we get those done. Your personal responsibilities, like the prodigal son, realized that he had just wasted all that time, all that energy, and all that money. He did not exercise his personal responsibility, and so he was willing to submit to his father as a servant so somebody else could manage his time and his assignments. That's how he saw his personal responsibility. I didn't do a good job with it. So, Father, you make me as one of your hired servants, and that way you schedule my time. You set my priorities. You dictate my responsibility. And that's kind of what Christians do, isn't it? Does that sound a little bit like Romans chapter 6? You once were the servants of sin, but you've obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine which was delivered you. Being then made free from sin. What was the prodigal son wanting? Free from his sin. I'm not worthy to be called your son. Just make me as one of your hired servants. Being free from sin, you became, here it is, the servants of righteousness. Servant? If we've been free from sin, who owns us? So if now we've been purchased through the blood of Christ and we're the servants of a righteous God, who's going to set our responsibilities? He is. Who's going to dictate what our family function is? He is. And then we know that we'll make good use of the time because who, in essence, is managing our time? God is. Yes, ma'am. Okay, if you didn't hear Denise, she said, some may look at this personal responsibility and think that's like your job and take care of your family, and that's really making sure our relationship to God's right, our personal relationship to God, that we would have our own personal study time, devotional time to make sure we're who we need to be. We do have that responsibility, don't we? Paul said in 2 Corinthians 13 and verse 5, examine yourselves whether you be in the faith. You see, my wife might assume some things about me. She might think I'm in the faith. She might think I'm doing certain things, but God knows. And so God expects us to have personal responsibility to say, am I a person of faith? Am I using my time wisely? Am I making sure that I have a knowledge of God's Word? Then that's going to affect our family relationship, isn't it? Then those roles come about where a person would leave his father and mother, and he would cleave to his wife, and they would be one flesh. What happens here? That single whole person who assumed personal responsibility for his relationship to God now has a relationship that he has some responsibilities for. It's here. We'll talk about this more tomorrow, but it's here. And how are you going to use that time? We saw, as soon as we got here, we saw James and Amanda and their kids. Since we don't see them all the time, you think, wow, I can't believe those kids. What happened? They're half grown. Probably doesn't seem that same way to them because they see them every day and they've seen the progression. But the passing of that time pretty stark to us. We need to make sure that we use this time wisely, that we respect its value. You get one shot at it. We saw while we were at the conference in Mobile this week, one of my PhD students who lives in Mobile was at the conference, and she has a little boy. How old is her little boy? 13 months. And so she brought him up to, or her mother did, for us to see him. And he's, holding on to her and trying to learn how to walk and all those things. And, she's been a full-time counselor. She's taught in university settings. She and her husband busy in church work. And she looked at me and Denise and she said, this is the hardest job I've ever done. It's constant, need something all the time, day and night. This is the hardest job. And I said, yeah, when you'd call Dr. Martin and say, can I put off that paper till next week? Can't put off anything with those little guys. They're plugged in. So that's a responsibility, and you need to take that on in the family. And Denise told her, she said, soak up every minute. He get away from me really quickly. They'll be grown before you know it. You see, that's from people who have grown children and grown grandchildren. You kind of get that perspective. You realize the value of that time and how you ought to use it. To spiritual responsibilities, we have a collective responsibility to each other. How do you use that? We even talk about that in the context of assembly, don't we? That we are to provoke each other to love and good work, and that we are to provoke each other to assemble. Not forsaking the assembly of themselves, a manner some is, but we are to encourage each other as we see that day approaching. That's a good use of time, isn't it? That's a spiritual responsibility we have. We need to use it wisely. All right. We're going to take a break here in just a minute. Regulate its use. Go back to one of the first comments you made, establish priorities. Can you? You don't have to necessarily answer that out loud, but I want you to think about it. Is that something that you practice doing? Establishing priorities? Can you say no to things that would pull you away from the priorities? Do you find it hard to say no? If other people are saying, hey, can you come do this? And there's something that really ought to take priorities. Can you? See, that's the use of this time. You don't get it back. You need to establish priorities of how you're going to use it. Schedule it realistically. Have you done, as I have done many times, have this ambitious schedule? You schedule too much? Way too much? Not realistic to think that all that could be done in that time frame? So you really can't enjoy any of it? Holidays kind of do that to us, doesn't it? Oh, y'all all come. Oh, everybody, sure, come on. Oh yeah, you can stay all week. How many bedrooms do you have? You know, what's the groceries like in the pantry? You know, the realistic part is all these personalities, all these people, all these conversation. Doesn't mean you can't do it, but you need to be realistic about it. Are those people coming in, do they represent assistance and help? You can say, sure, you can come. Hey, here's what I'm prepared to do, what I'm able to do. If you can do so and so, absolutely. Can you do that? Or you think, oh, they always come to my house. Yep. Oh, we have a good time. We really do. And you're thinking, oh, here they all come. You know, it's not realistic sometimes how we plan our lives. Couples sometimes try to put too much in there, and they go and do this and involved with these folks and have friends over. Nothing wrong with any of that. Unless it becomes unrealistic. That is, you can't have private time, you can't have personal time, you can't have intimate time, you can't learn each other's language because there's too many other folks speaking their own dialect around you. Got to set the priority, and got to make sure that you schedule realistically. Simplify it down. How many of us have said and heard said to us, you know, my life is just so hectic. Who scheduled it? Well, you know, I have. There's a difference in what we want to do and what we have to do. Delegate tasks. Not real easy for some people to do. Being one of 11, that's not a difficult thing for me to do. We always had to delegate. Always had things delegated to us. Somebody wasn't available, somebody else had to do it. So that's not a foreign thing to me, but some people find it really hard. And part of it is they want things done a specific way, and there's not anybody else could do it that way, and so they take it all on. That's not realistic, particularly holidays. Going to have everybody in your house. Those things that are your specialty, that you cook and that you do, then hold on to those. But if there's something somebody else can do, you ought to delegate that so you can enjoy your family, so they can feel like they're participating. In relationships, don't shut your spouse out if they offer to do something. They may not wash the dishes exactly like you want them washed. If they want to be in the kitchen with you and want to be talking to you and think, oh, they put that pot in the dishwasher. I never put that in the dishwasher. It's not going to get clean in the dishwasher. And here's what you need to do. Use your time wisely and say, I appreciate so much your help. Oh, it just really makes a difference. Because it does. After he's not there, before you put it in the shelf, you can rewash that pot. Or at a different time, when it doesn't diminish what he's doing to help you, you can say, I wouldn't say it when he's already got it loaded in the dishwasher, unless it's something that's going to melt in there. But I'd wait till another time and say, oh, by the way, we were both busy, and so I didn't have a chance to tell you this the other day. But what I usually do with that pot is I just put it over in the sink and put it in soak, and then I'll wash that later. So next time, just don't worry about that. That'll give you more room for the other things. That sounds a little different, doesn't it? You see, if we don't delegate, if we don't allow people to participate, they're never going to know how to speak our language. Never going to know. We have to build that in. We have to make sure that we can delegate some of those things. If the kids are making up the bed, You know, don't just tell them to go clean up their room and do those things. Show them how. Do it with them. It'll be time, quality time together, a good use of your time. And if the bed's a little wrinkled, they didn't tuck it under the pillow just right, the world's not going to come to the end. If the Lord comes back, it's all going to be burned up anyway. Nobody's going to know. I mean, really, you're going to have to get down to some of those things and realize relationships are only formed and maintained with good use of time. And women, don't get to the point where you say, just go on, I'll do it myself. You know, communicating the wrong thing, not a good use of time, wrong priority. And guys, good easy way out to say, I just can't do it like my wife. Nobody asked you to. You don't have to do it like your wife, but just ask your wife how she'd like for it to be done and participate. Those are really good uses of time. Develop the skills of decision making. We'll pick up there when we come back. All right? Let's take a quick break. Probably look like 6 or 7 minutes.